the debate last night. What is what is your take on the debate between
Well, I
Kamala Harris
think
and Trump?
it completely empty theatre.
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing to say about it is that again, and I'm going to focus again on Kamala Harris because she's the person who's over promoted again. I mean, she said nothing of value or of substance at all. The entire pitch of the debate was to try to humiliate and anger and irritate Trump in some fashion. And well, up to a point, she was successful in that. But then so what? I mean, everybody,
Yeah.
Americans know Donald Trump by now very, very well. They know the sort of person he is. It's not going to change a single vote. This is my own view.
Yeah, I agree. But I do think Trump has a certain disadvantage because Kamala Harris is, I mean, even though she has been the vice president, but she is a lesser known because she's not as
Yeah,
prominently reported and
yeah,
investigated and all that kind of thing. And also, as a woman, I find that Trump sometimes is not as aggressive as he was against Biden. You know, if it's with
yeah.
Biden, he can say anything. He can, you know, but this is
No,
a minority woman. It to a certain degree, it limited a little bit his attacking style. That's which is he's very good at. I think Trump is good at attacking, but I do think that's kind of a limiting for him. But I agree with you. Even though overall, I actually think Harris did better than I thought, than people anticipated. She didn't just burst into laugh all the time and doesn't doesn't have much to say. She does seems well prepared, but I agree with you. It's not going to change any people's mind. But but
yeah,
I
I
do think
think.
that
Go
there's a
on, go
certain
on.
disadvantage that the Trump has, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the major mistakes he made, in my opinion, was agreeing to another interview hosted by another television station that is fundamentally hostile to him. I mean, I think he could have insisted. I mean, I think he did a program with CNN. I think he could have insisted. Look, I did it on CNN. They're very hostile to me. The next one should be on Fox. If you don't
Yeah.
want to do me on Fox, then frankly, I'm not interested because you're only prepared to talk to me when it's all stacked on your side. And I agree. I think he has institutional problems. First of all, you're quite right. He finds it difficult to attack a woman and a
Yeah.
minority woman. I think that is absolutely correct. And undoubtedly, he was told in advance of the debate, don't do that. And perhaps that was the correct advice, actually. I think that if he'd come out too aggressive, it might have led to some unfortunate headlines for him, which this time he's avoided. I mean, I think that's one thing to say. And the other thing is, of course, the moderation, as is always the way, was very, very biased, I felt, always
Yeah.
towards Harris. But people will say that she did better than they expected. A lot of people are saying that. Um, the fact is, she was incredibly carefully prepared in
Uh-huh.
advance. You could see that they planned and prepared this to the last detail. But she didn't say anything in
No.
the end that will, you know, that will stay in the public memory. A
Yeah.
week from now, it'll all be forgotten. It's not like, the big debates that happened on other occasions, the famous one where he said, Mr. Quayle, JFK was my
Yeah.
friend, you're not JFK, or Nixon, Kennedy way back in 60. I mean, it wasn't that kind of a debate.
No.
I mean, she made Trump get angry, but we all know Trump, is a thin-skinned individual who sometimes gets angry. It didn't in the end. It didn't in the end change this lack of anything concrete about Kamala
Yeah.
Harris herself.
Yeah. One thing, actually, there are 2 points I think I would say working towards Trump's advantage. One is she said her economic plan is so good that even Goldman Sachs endorsed it. I'm not sure that's a good thing for Harris because
No.
they're supposed to represent, the public. I'm not sure endorsement from Goldman Sachs she should be talking about. So I think that's a big mistake from her. Trump should really play that, I think, if
Yeah.
Trump is smart. The other thing I think Trump said in the end was very good. He said that all these things that Kamala Harris promised you that she will do, she could do it now. She could do it
Yeah.
now. Why
Yeah.
doesn't she? Right? I think that's also a good point from Trump. So that's a big punch, I think.
Absolutely, I agree, and I think that's the theme that he's going to play, because of course what Kamala is trying to do, what Harris is trying to do, is she's trying to be the anti-incumbent incumbent.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this very odd situation. Of course, I mean, it's happened in many elections. I remember back in, well, I can't remember when he was elected, 2015, that Macron ran as the the outsider, the anti-establishment outsider, when everybody could see, who wanted to see, that he was entirely an establishment insider. But with Harris, she is the vice president. It's the Biden-Harris administration. I mean, if she wanted to do one of these things, that she could have done them.
Yeah.
But of course, and she's not breaking with Biden either, of course.
Yeah, well, her slogan was a new way forward or something like that, which
Yeah.
seems to me like you deny what you're doing now for the past 3.5
Yeah.
years is the wrong way, right? So that's why you need a new way, isn't it?
Oh, precisely. Well, that's exactly right. Yes. I mean, this was why she tried to sort of heat up the temperature, because her messaging ultimately is bad,
Yes.
and it's the sort of messaging which goes against the mood in the United States today.
Yeah. Yeah, talking about which, so in the meantime, there is more than 200 like Bush, Romney, McCain alums. They have been writing an open letter to endorse Harris, right? At the same time, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., and even Tim Walz's own brother, they all endorsed Trump. Is there a new political realignment going on here?
I think this is the single most important thing, and I think you put your finger on it, because you're absolutely correct. What we see is the political class closing ranks, be they nominally Democrat or nominally Republican. It's the political establishment, the old establishment that has governed the United States for decades and has brought the United States to the happy position it is in today, versus all of those who represent the dissident, alternative, critical views, who's looking at the situation and they're saying, look, this doesn't work. What we're doing can't continue like this. Some of us perhaps self-identify as being on the left. Some of us perhaps self-identify as being on the right. But the most important thing at the moment is to break the hold of the political class. And that's what we're starting to see. This is the division in America. That's, by the way, goes straight back to your point about Goldman Sachs, because by
Yeah.
talking up about how Goldman Sachs supports her, again, Kamala is basically saying, I am on the side of the establishment, of the big people. That's why I want Dick Cheney to support me. That's why I want all of these people to support me. So, whereas Trump doesn't want any of those people, or at least if he understands his politics, he doesn't want any of these people. He is fighting upwards. So he wants the support of the Tulsi Gabbards, the RFKs, Walz's brother,
Brother.
people like that. And I think that's exactly correct. That's the big conflict in the US today.
It's pretty amazing because talking about Dick Cheney, I think at one point Hillary Clinton couldn't stand Dick Cheney.
No.
She even, with one interview, I remember she was saying that Dick Cheney, with his motorcade, came over something, and here came out, Dick Cheney, the Darth Vader. That was the description she used to describe Dick Cheney, and now like they are happy family. Cheney openly come out to endorse Kamala Harris. I find that stunning. I find the whole thing is just absolutely stunning.
I find it absolutely stunning. I mean, given especially what not just Hillary Clinton, what the
Mhm.
Democrats used to say about Dick Cheney. You read, I mean,
Yeah.
there was, I remember there was a film, it was actually rather shocking and I think inappropriate film that was published at, towards the end of Bush's time as
Mm.
president, George W. Bush's time as president, which is the assassination of George W. Bush. And it was all about what would happen if Dick Cheney became president of the United States. And it was, roundups of everybody, World War III instantly. And you're absolutely right. He was being presented at that time as a cross between Himmler and Darth Vader. I mean, it was terrifying. And now, of course, we embrace him. He is this, sensible, rational, level-headed Democrat, the man who was behind, the torture in Abu Ghraib, as we used to say then. He's suddenly now, of course, all that's all forgotten. Now he's protecting our democracy, from the forces of darkness, which are actually Donald Trump and his cohorts. I mean, it's quite extraordinary to see the change.
Sometimes, I mean, not sometimes. I just think that politics is very sinister. I don't know. It's just yeah.
Well, it
Uh,
is sinister. It is truly Orwellian.
yeah. Mhm, mhm.
Um, uh, Oceania is at war with Eurasia. Oceania has always been at war with Eurasia. Everything that contradicts that is what they say memory hold. So you don't talk anymore about Dick Cheney being Dick Cheney, the kind of Dick Cheney that was. He's no longer the most sinister and dangerous vice president in US history. He's suddenly become this virtuous Democrat who's coming to the rescue of the Republic. Um, this kind of manipulation of history and of memory is unbelievably sinister.
Yeah. 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 Okay, about China. So, quite a few European leaders are visiting China.
Mm,
The latest one is the Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre. I think when he landed in China, the Spanish Prime Minister hasn't left yet, Pedro
mm,
Sanchez.
mm.
What's your take on that? Yellen also seems like talking about visit China again. So, what's your take on all this?
Right, there's two things to say. I mean, I come back to your point, which we made in one of our programs a short while ago, that Beijing is now the center of international diplomacy. It's the place everybody wants to go or needs to go. They all need to speak to the Chinese leaders, to Wang Yi, to Xi Jinping, to the Chinese Prime Minister.
Yeah.
They all need to go there. I think that there is another major factor at play, and that is that we are now starting to see stronger and stronger signs in the West of a major economic recession developing. It's not exactly clear when when the economic storm is going to hit, but I think there's a growing sense that it is coming. So we had that wobble in the summer. We had more problems in the stock markets last week.
Yeah.
There's reports the British government is going through a major program of tax rises and government spending cuts, which have shocked the new Labour government, the Labour government supporters. And we've also seen a fall in the price of oil, which is a sign that economic activity is falling. So all of this is happening. Now, once upon a time, leaders in Europe, especially, looked to the United States to take the steps to resolve the problems in the global economy. They're gradually coming to understand that the United States cannot any longer do that by itself. So they are going to China. Now, in the case of Europe, there is another factor, which is that Europe has been, and this is difficult for Americans, I think, or it's even more so maybe for Chinese people to understand. Europe has been in a period of around uh, 15 years of stagnation, of recession and stagnation. There's been no growth to speak of since the 2008 crisis. living standards are probably lower than they were before the 2008 crisis. There's a growing understanding in Europe that we are falling behind in all of the key technologies. AI technology, Europe has never developed its own digital platforms in the way that China and the United States, and by the way, Russia have done. I mean, notice Telegram, Russian platform. There's nothing analogous to that in Europe. So the Europeans sense that everything is not going well, that their economy is stagnating, that they're far behind in motor vehicle production, and the Chinese are now the world leaders. I read a report about this, and it contrasted the situation with motor vehicles, not just in Europe, but across the West, between the Western ones and the Chinese ones, and the extent to which China has now fully understood and gotten on top of EV technologies and how to operate them. So Mario Draghi, who was the former head of the European Central Bank, has now come up and said that Europe needs to spend 800 billion euros a year over 5 years to try to upgrade its technologies and its industries in order to achieve American technological levels, because we're falling behind. The Americans are falling behind everyone else. Realistically, the European system is far too dysfunctional for the Europeans to be able to do that themselves. So they have to turn to China and hope that the Chinese will do it for them, because they can't do it themselves. So this is why they're all going to China at this time.
But there seems like there's some divisions. And so one thing that Pedro Sanchez did, seems like after his visit, he wanted EU to drop this tariffs on Chinese EVs. Now, part of it is because China actually had a countermeasure against Spain's pork. Pork export is very important for Spain, of course.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of the reason. But in any event, that seems like that, because it's EU who wanted to have tariffs, high tariffs on the Chinese EVs, but it seems Spain and possibly, I think even Germany was against it. So there's a division within EU, isn't it?
Yeah, there is, absolutely. I mean, well, here we see the EU doing, which is one of the reasons why Europe is in the disastrous situation that it is. The EU is doing what the Americans want, which is it was the Americans who perceive Chinese EV technology as some kind of a threat, just as they perceive Chinese developments in AI technology as a threat. So that's why the Americans have imposed tariffs, or are talking about tariffs on EVs, and why they got the Europeans to do the same. And it isn't good for Europe, because Europe is so far behind here. And Europe is going to have a massive problem developing its own EV technology. Volkswagen is now talking about closing its own factories in Germany.
Yes.
I mean, that kind of thing. What they need to do is to work together with the Chinese to develop win-win partnerships on this. Some European leaders understand it, but the EU centre is opposed. And that checkmates every attempt to try to develop these partnerships, which are the partnerships which Europe needs to make in order to move forward.